Hello, and I welcome, this is Herbert Falk, Vice President of the UCA Users Group. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar about strategies for using 61850 Edition 2 Amendment 1. I hope you will find it useful and get your questions answered. I'd like to have Beth Capellas kind of give some instructions regarding the webinar, and then we can move on with the presentations.
Thanks, Herb. Good morning, everyone. And again, thanks for joining us today for today's webinar. As Herb mentioned, my name is Beth Capellas. I'm the marketing manager at Triangle Microworks. Before we get started, I did want to go over some housekeeping items. The webinar is scheduled to be 1 hour long. We will be taking a couple of breaks to answer questions throughout the webinar. The audience is on mute due to the large size, so please submit your questions online using the webinar toolbar under the section titled Questions. You can submit questions as soon as you have them. Don't feel that you have to wait for a break or wait until the end. We will read and answer some questions at the breaks, and we will have some time in the end to go over questions and answers. We're also happy to stay on the line after the webinar is over and continue to answer questions if they're still coming in. So if you've got some extra time and you want to hang on the line with us, we're happy to just keep answering questions as they continue to come in. I also wanted to mention that the webinar will be recorded. When you sign off of the webinar, you actually will receive a short survey. Once you answer the survey, you will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording. It will also be posted at trianglemicroworks.com on our website early next week, as well as the UCA's website. So you can access it there as well. With that, I think we're ready to get into the content. So Herb, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Beth. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Stuart Laval. He is the current and new chairman of the board of the UCA International Users Group, and he works for Duke Energy, and he has some introductory comments.
Thank you, Herb. Welcome, good morning, or good afternoon for those who are overseas. Appreciate the opportunity to introduce the UCA for those who are not familiar with the International Users Group. We are a nonprofit organization. We're served by our members, and it's a bunch of contributors really trying to drive the organization forward to enhance interoperability through the industry. Clearly the main focus in this presentation is the 61850 user group content, but UCA also supports some of the other kind of user groups, such as the Common Information Model, as well as the Open Field Message Bus. I'm also the co-chair of the Open Field Message Bus user group as well. And all three we feel are very complementary and are based on standards to really move the industry forward for interoperability and also the testing of these standards. Next slide. So the mission of UCA is to enable integration through deployment of open standards, providing a forum in which various stakeholders in the energy industry can work cooperatively together as a member of a common organization. Really the focus is on influencing, endorsing a lot of these open and public standards that are appropriate for the utility market and really addressing the needs of the members. We also specify and develop testing certification programs to really help accelerate the adoption of interoperability products and systems based on these standards I just mentioned. And also outreach is a big focus, driving awareness to really help promote and educate the users and the community on these important interoperability standards. Next slide. And the last slide is UCA is spending a lot of time really improving its focus to enhance some of its services that are appropriate to the members, trying to improve the experience. We've made some investments recently to improve the website, collaboration spaces, so that the tools for interactions between members virtually, are effective. in light of the COVID, we've had to adapt, and we're making those investments to make it a better virtual user group experience, as well as when we can meet in face-to-face next year. We also plan to resume those very vibrant interoperability plug fests and other user group meetings. Last but not least, the testing certification program is very important and paramount to UCA, and we plan to continue to invest into improving the quality of that experience and standing up some interoperability testing certification authority programs to support the conformance testing of 61850, STEM, and OpenFMB. So that concludes my section, and I'll pass it back to you, Herb.
Thank you, Stuart. The reason why we are all here is to discuss 61850 Edition 2 Amendment 1 and the impact on testing and the industry at large. This slide is intended to show you the intended relationship between how UCA has structured its conformance testing to align with the IEC cadence of version releases. IEC typically has a stabilization period of every 5 years, but only has the view of one standard release. So when Edition 2.1 came along, Edition 2.1 by IEC, and it's really Edition 2 Amendment 1. Edition 2 Amendment 1 is now viewed as by IEC as the only Edition 2. Now, amendments are not supposed to introduce compatibility issues within the same version, and that's how we basically structured our cadence for conformance testing. And our basic policy was to provide stable conformance testing for each edition for a minimum of 10 years so that the industry could plan on their migrations from one edition to another. And as I said, we expected incompatibilities to be based upon releases and not amendments. And originally, the end of life date for conformance testing on Edition 2 would be evaluated upon the release of version 3, which isn't on the horizon, by the way, so I don't want people to be concerned about that. What actually happened in Edition 2 Amendment 1 is there were some changes, that some intentional, some non-intentional, that created forward compatibility issues between Edition 2 and Edition 2.1 systems. We queried the user community, and you'll hear from Carlos later on, and they came back and said that they have RFIs and RFPs calling out Edition 2 and not 2.1. And since there's a compatibility issue, they wanted us to do something to provide them the capability of continuing conformance testing of Edition 2 devices, not based upon the normal 1-year rollover policy that we had in our quality assurance plan. So Edition 2.1 broke the UCAIug assumptions for our conformance testing cadence. And because of that, we spent a significant amount of time to put together a white paper that documents the compatibility issues from Edition 2.0 to 1.0, Edition 2.0 to 2.1, and so forth and so on. Within that white paper, we provide recommendations on how users could address migration into 2.1, and it's a white paper that's available to UCAIug members. That white paper is the basis for most of what you're going to hear in the rest of this presentation. What we also determined based upon this white paper was we needed to modify our testing policy. So basically this graph shows that right now you can vendors can actively submit IEDs and applications for edition 2.0 testing. And you'll see the keyword only. We have a lab that is currently scheduled to undergo accreditation for edition 2.1 testing. Once they get accredited, which should be soon, vendors can choose to do edition 2 or 2.1 conformance testing or both. We're going to continue to allow edition 2 conformance testing only till January of 2024. And after that, we're going to allow people to get conformance certificates for edition 2, but only after that device or application has passed conformance for edition 2.1. And we think that this provides a migration path for the industry forward. Obviously, the actual date of January 2028 depends on future amendment and release cadence of IEC. Oops. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Richard Skimmel of D&B to talk about the impact on the actual testing.
Yes, thank you, Herb. This is Richard Schimmel. You can hear me. You can see my screen, I think. Yes. I'm working for the same company for over 30 years. It's just that the company keeps on changing the name. It used to be KEMA, then DNV KEMA, DVGL, and now it's DNV. I will talk about the testing and certification of Edition 2 Amendment 1. A moment. Yeah. So testing is part of the quality assurance process. The quality assurance is specified in the standard in IEC 6150 Part 4. There's a product development quality assurance, mostly for manufacturers. And we have on the right, we have project execution. That project is like automating a substation automation system. So that's done by the utilities. So UCA and we as DNV are involved in the middle, especially in the part of conformance testing. So conformance testing, why do we do conformance testing in the first place? So yeah, to reduce interoperability risk and to provide maximum customer confidence that the certified device will interoperate with other certified devices now, but also in the future. The conformance testing needs a reference. You need a reference where you base your testing on. If the testing is passed or failed, you need a reference. The reference is done in 6150 Part 10 conformance testing, which is just on a high level where we define abstract test cases. And the UCAIug works out the abstract test cases into detailed test procedures. So I'm the editor of both the Part 10, and I'm also one of the editors of many UCA conformance test procedures. So what is the role of the UCA International User Group related to 6150? As mentioned, UCA sets up conformance, maintains 6150 conformance test procedures. The UCA accredits 6150 test labs, and we have level A labs and level B. Level A is vendor independent and level B is vendor specific. So also vendors can have a test lab and certify their own devices. Level A, it's DNV or KEMA. We were level, and we are level A. Once we do a test and the device passes the test, we issue the certificate to the UCA, and the UCA will review, and when okay, it will post it on the SharePoint on the UCA website. So here you can see it will change in a while, but here we have the test certificates. We started this already in 2005, so over 15 years, and at the moment 1,195 certificates are posted, are available on this website from all the labs, not just our lab, but from all level A and also all level B labs. All certificates are you can find, and you can search for a specific device from a specific vendor. There's some search possibilities. Very interesting to see what firmware versions, what devices have been certified. UCA also hosts and organizes a bi-yearly interoperability event starting from 2011. So this year there's another one. Okay, coming back to conformance testing. Where we started, it was edition 1 or first edition. Very easy, no migration at all. There was only one edition. We started with testing, certifying a server with the MMS interface and GUIs publish and subscribe. And then we moved to clients, so we can also certify the client, MMS client interfaces. And also merging unit that publishes sampled values according to the 9-2 LE specification. So it's only the publishing, we don't do subscribe. Again, edition 1, and it has ended already. So no edition 1 certificates will be posted anymore on the UCA SharePoint. So of course we do edition 2 for quite some years, and as Herb mentioned, we will keep on doing it till 2024 and also beyond. We still have MMS server and client and GUIs publish and subscribe. What is new in edition 2 compared to edition 1, that we also can certify the configuration tool. So we have a configuration tool for an IED, the IED configuration tool, or ICT. We can do we have conformance test procedures for that. We have also test procedures for a system configuration tool, the SCT. I must say the server and the client are very popular. There are many certificates available in the database. Testing the tools is quite rare. I think they're out of, there are only a few, less than 5 certificates for tools available in this database. It's a bit of pity, I think. So edition 2 has no sampled values. Okay, as mentioned, only after 2024, only in combination with Amendment 1. So now we are moving to Amendment 1. And what has been shown, and I told you that the tooling, so the server and client, that's all the same. The tooling has changed. So we have seen in the UCA interoperability testing that there are quite some issues related to the SCL files and also to the engineering tools, the ICT tools, and yeah, that's not good. So based on that, we decided, okay, let's do some basic ICT testing added into the server test. So it used to be separate. Now it's integrated. So the ICT tool and the server are integrated. So importing an SCD file and exporting an ICD file and IAD file are mandatory test cases. And now, if you want to certify an Amendment 1 server. For time sync, we also we support PTP time synchronization, the precision time protocol, And we support sampled values. Sampled values based not on the 92LE, but now based on the IEC 61869-9, both the publishing as well as the subscribing. So as mentioned, to improve the quality of the ICT tooling, we mandate the basic ICT functionality as part of the server test. So having a certified server with a bad ICT tool, it will still, it may have a certificate in edition 2, but for sure in Amendment 1, it won't happen again. Okay, so what has changed in Amendment 1? Okay, the ICT tool has become part of the server test. That's as I showed you in the picture. We also verify the backward compatibility to edition 1 and edition 2. So if we want to certify a client, it shall work with an Amendment 1 server, of course, but also to edition 2 server and edition 1 server. So it will be backwards compatible. We also will check the forward compatibility to future edition, so to editions 3 or 4. Yeah? So the existing features will be compatible in the future. Yeah? And also, now that we know how Amendment 1 is working, we will update the current edition 2 test procedures to also be ensure forward compatibility to Amendment 1. Yeah, there's a white paper. It will show you the details, but actually the functionality was already in edition 2. It was just an optional feature, and the only thing we need to do is to change that optional feature into a mandatory feature. So it's nothing new. We don't add anything. It's just that there's an optional feature will change to mandatory. Okay, if we look forward to security, cybersecurity is also part of Amendment 1 and is being worked on by the work group 15. And so we will have secure MMS, we will have secure GUIs and secure sample values. As well, there will be the routable GUIs, so that those GUIs can be routable, can pass through a router. So if you want to use GUIs outside the substation, you can use a routable GUIs, and by definitions these are secure. And same for sample values. So if you want to use sample values outside the substation, you can add security. Yeah. It's being worked on. Yeah, we didn't want to wait till security was available, so we already got started with Amendment 1, but the security is expected next year, 2022. To summarize, Amendment 1, we add functionality for ICT. So the ICT, the ICT tooling will improve the quality and improve the interoperability. I hope we will see the results soon at the next interoperability testing organized by the UCA. We will address backward and forward compatibility. Security will be added when available next year. And yes, at the moment we have available the server test procedures, the client, the ICT tooling, and the complete ICT tooling and SCT are in progress. Yeah. And of course, yeah, UCA endorses vendors and utilities to implement Amendment 1 within a reasonable number of years. So we discussed a long time what is reasonable. Certainly not 1 year. That's not reasonable. But yes, say 2024. 24 is good. Okay. This concludes my presentation. We can have a look at.
Please keep your slide up, Richard.
Sorry?
If you would. So this is our break for answering questions. There are a couple of interesting questions for you, Richard.
Yes,
and I just want to run through them real quick. How can you test 61869-9 compliance when it's based on edition 2.0. And I'll take a swag at this. 61869-9 actually requires a data object that's only in edition 2.1 officially. So it is aligned with 2.1. Do you have any other comments, Richard?
Yeah, the 61869 refers to Amendment 1. That's the whole issue. The IEC 61869 does not refer to edition 2. It refers to edition 2 Amendment 1. And that's it also adds a new common data class, which is only available in Amendment 1. So that's why this 61869 is it's on Amendment 1.
Okay, is routable goose need to meet the performance requirements of layer 2 goose? I guess that's the question. I have experience in a system with both layer 2 goose and routable goose, and there's no significant performance degradation between those two protocols, but when you do turn security on, the layer 2 goose and routable goose, they're equivalent. But with security turned on, routable goose does does cause a slight delay, but it's implementation specific.
Well, the other issue there, of course, is that the network is constrained for layer 2. If you're trying to run routable goose across, say, the full internet, then you can't make those guarantees.
Yep. The other thing is a lot of people use L2TP to route layer 2 goose, and they think that's going to avoid NERC SIP regulations. The regulations are changing, and basically, I think that type of an approach is going to be viewed as a routable protocol in the future. I've answered the backward compatibility issue, I think.
Herb, you've got time for one more question.
Okay. So as part of the tools testing, only ICD and IID and SCD files shall be validated. No SCD files, question mark, Richard? No
That's
CID.
Correct. Yes, the CID file is only used internally, so we don't care about the CID. It's the ICD, IID, and SCD, but the CID is out of scope.
So with that, we have an interesting question that I've intentionally delayed. So, if you will hang on to the end of the presentation, hopefully you'll get your answer. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce Joel Greene of Triangle Microworks. He's the Director of Development for them for IEC 61850. Take it away, Joel.
Thanks, Herb. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. In addition to my roles at Triangle Microworks that Herb mentioned, I'm also an active member of several of the IEC working groups and editor of the core parts of 61850. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about how we maintain the standards and progress the standards and what impacts those have on users and systems. Moving forward with 61850, as we move into Amendment 1, similar to as we did with the move to Edition 2, we've got a few different use cases where this comes into play. We've got the case of a brand new substation. We've got the case of replacing a substation. And then we've got the issues of expanding or maintaining existing substations. In the first two categories, with a newer replacement, when everything's new, life is fun and easy. We build a system to the latest standard. Everything in there operates. There's nothing to worry about here. This is what we'd all like to be doing. The other couple of cases where we're mixing in new devices with older systems are where things get a little interesting. We've got a couple different situations here. Richard talked about edition 1 a couple of times. We're not certifying any new edition 1. Hopefully no one's installing any new edition 1 systems, but there are edition 1 systems out there that have some life left in them. And so those have to be maintained. Edition 2 is now moving into that category of later in the life cycle of systems, but those systems in particular have to be maintained going forward. We've got a couple possibilities. Sometimes we need to expand systems, add new bays, and then of course we have maintenance, we have replacement of equipment, and those two situations are very similar from the perspective of how to move forward with the standard. We've got a couple different options on how to move forward with these systems that are in place. If we don't need any new functionality, we can simply add or replace the devices that are currently in the system. A couple paths down that road. Of course, certification and the standards have nothing to do with products that are on the shelf. When the system's installed, your vendor has some commitment to life cycle to produce those same devices throughout the life of the system. Typically, those devices should be available for replacement, no problem. In some cases, we see devices go obsolete because parts are no longer available and so forth. In those cases, the vendor can certify new devices to the existing standard. And as Herb went through the testing procedure, UCA is going to allow a process where new devices certified to edition 2.1 can then also be certified to edition 2 to handle that replacement life cycle issue. So we've spent a lot of time in analyzing that problem. There's a clear path there for those maintenance situations. On the other hand, our job as the working group, as IEC, is to continue to meet new customer needs, to improve the standard, in some cases to correct it, produce new models, new features as required. So we've got to keep evolving the standard. Technology improves, we've got to work with it. So we've added new features to the standard, new services in some cases. In the case where now we have an existing system and we need to integrate those devices which are built to the current rev of the standard, we've gone through and analyzed these cases also. There's an annex in part 6 of 61850 that goes through the rules for this. At a high level, it boils down to some pretty simple concepts. Our philosophy is that the critical thing here is for any devices that need to exchange information to be able to understand each other. So what that means is that servers typically operate at one level. Clients and tools that operate with multiple devices have to understand all previous revisions of the standard up to the current. So when that gets to implementing the actual system, here's what we get into. If we're happy with the 2.0 system, we can integrate the new devices as in the first option. But if we need to use some of those features, we need to update our system configuration tool. The system configuration tool needs to understand all the devices in the system and the interactions between the two. So the system configuration tool needs to be the latest revision of the standard used in the system. This gets us to in this case, 2.1 system. The next thing we need to do is look at our clients in the system. We've talked a little bit about one backwards compatibility issue. I'll go into detail that in a later slide. But we need to look at our clients, our HMI, our gateway, our control center, and see if it correctly handles the reservation of control blocks. If we have a client that doesn't do that, the HMI and the gateway, then that device needs to be updated in order to have a 2.1 system. The big consideration that I keep alluding to is this reservation. Now, this reservation concept has existed since Tissue 453 of Edition 1 in 2007. From that point on, 2007, any devices that implemented that Tissue 453, which changed reporting from Edition 1 to Edition 2, essentially, from that time forward, should be able to handle these concepts. Unfortunately, for backwards compatibility reasons, that reservation system in the server was added as optional. And because it was optional, a lot of servers didn't implement it. And unfortunately, a reservation system that's not mandatory turns out to not be very helpful. So in the amendment, we finally took the step of making that reservation system mandatory. What this has exposed is that a lot of clients didn't implement the reservation scheme. Even though it was optional in the server, a client needs to be able to interact with any server out there. So the client implementation, a proper client implementation, should have had this reservation support since 2007. Some have not, but this is what has to be updated as we move forward in 2.1. On the left here, we've got a screenshot from a UCA certificate. Herb mentioned a little bit about the certificate database, and Richard talked about how many devices have been certified and so forth. The database is currently being overhauled. Herb's doing a lot of work to make this process easier for users to get to. You can go to the UCA website and you can get access to all certificates for all the devices the UCA certified. And on this certificate, we list every test that particular device has been tested and passed, of course, if it has a certificate. And this is what you see here on the left side of the slide. We've got the mandatory test cases in the center column. Those should be there for all devices. On the right-hand side, we have conditional tests. So these are the services that the client can opt to provide. And this CBR 33 is the test that we're looking for here, that will indicate that this client has been tested with the reservation concepts and should be completely compatible with new Amendment 1 servers. Beyond that change to the services, the Amendment 1 brings a lot of new data models, data objects, data attributes, which are supporting new data, especially in the DER world. We have a lot of new information available. But older devices that didn't know about those information yesterday still don't need to know that information to get their job done. So when we put these devices in systems together, the reason the SCT has to know all of this, the SCT knows which devices understand which information and can create the data sets and communication paths between the devices, ensuring that both ends of the communication exchange only information that they understand. So older devices not being able to use the new data does not affect the older device at all. It can still do everything it's always done. It doesn't do the new features, obviously, but it didn't need to do those before. As long as our SCT is able to configure these devices correctly, there should be no trouble intermixing these different levels. So wrapping up here with some of the basic ideas going forward, and as we migrate these systems, the standard continues to evolve and improve. We need to keep going with that. We do our best to minimize impacts on the users. We're adding features. We very carefully consider any cases that we need to cause a speed bump. This reservation, we spent many hours debating this and concluded that it was worth the minor amount of trouble here, where we have implementations that were not the best before. But we have a mission to continue the standard. We make those decisions to bring forward. We've got limited impacts here. We've got new features and data that cannot be used with older devices, but they don't impact the existing functionality of the systems at all. These are the highlights, the key points to keep in mind with Amendment 1. That's what we need to look at from a standard perspective. Herb?
Thank you, Joel. I'd like to turn this over to Carlos de Castillo Rodriguez from Elwood. He is going to give a user perspective, and then we'll have some final thoughts. And if you can stick around, we can answer some more questions. So Carlos, I'm going to make you presenter.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon here from Spain. This is Carlos Rodriguez del Castillo. I work in Red Eléctrica. Currently, I work in Elwood, that is the innovation company of the group, of Red Eléctrica Group. But I have been working in the substation engineering department of Red Eléctrica for 15 years. And Red Eléctrica is the sole transmission agent and operator of the Spanish electricity system. So I will try to give a user perspective from migrating from 2.0 to 2.1. So let's start taking a quick look at the market. At first, we have utilities. Utility world is complex because each utility is independent from each other. There are some tries to have a common requirements and common solution for different utility, but it's not easy because each utility have different and specific requirements, different scopes of 6150 implementations, process bus, station bus, different services used, and also each utility has its own roadmap and procurement strategy. On the other hand, we have providers that they are trying to sell their products as much as possible. So providers need to have flexible solutions and specific implementation with specific management in order to fulfill utility requirements, because they have to handle different specifications. So that makes more difficult a patch and improvement strategy, and also affects to roadmap decisions. And in the middle, we have the system integrators that sometimes they are also providers, and sometimes they are also the same the utility. But in the end, the system integrators are looking for the best solution from a business perspective. So these three big actors, I think, create the market, and of course, we need the market to go to 2.1. If we take a look about possible patch pushers or stoppers for doing the migration to edition 2.1, in the utility context, the procurement strategy is a potential stopper. There are some if there are contracts that last several years, it's very common to freeze specification during this period of time. So during this period of time, it's not possible to go to a different edition of the standard. But on the other hand, if the utility wants to catch the best technological improvement, then they could be a pusher for adopting new editions. But also there could be some restriction if the utility applies a normalized solutions for all of its projects. So again, that depends on how many projects you have and different policies. If talking about the providers context, providers are usually pushers for adopting new editions of the standard. It's just going forward to reach the technological leadership in the market. But in the end, they have to give the continuation of the services of the service to clients. So they have to adapt and accommodate the adoption of the new editions to the utility requirements. And finally, the system integrators, if they get cost savings or time reduction with the new edition, they can push to try to introduce the new edition as soon as possible in the market. But of course, they have to see a benefit from that. Oops. Now some key points that I think the utility needs to, some questions that needs to be answered in order to take a decision. So how mature is edition 2.1? So I think that with the certification test of 2.1, we can consider that this edition is mature. So let's see when this is when this is possible. Another question is, are there enough certified products in 2.1 in the market? Not today, we have to wait a little bit, but it will be something interesting to know how many certified products are in the market. are compatible with edition 2.0. We have seen in this presentation that there is an issue with the client, but in general, if you have your product certified with 2.1, it's going to be compatible with 2.0. Does the utility have solutions in edition 1.0? There is a question in the Q&A section that say that there is still a lot of edition 1 systems in the world. I really don't know. From the point of view of Electrica, we only have one. But it's something that you have to take into account if you have a lot of systems with edition 1.0 and you have to upgrade them, then move to 2.1 in order not to create an intermediate step. And also it's important to know if your projects are turnkey projects or the utilities, the system integrator and the projects are, let's say, made by the utility. Because in the turnkey projects, usually you could be more flexible, you could give more flexibility to the system integrator. But if the utility is its own system integrator, then the policy maybe could be more restrictive. And of course, if you have a unique global solution for all your projects, or you have a case by case or project by project, if you have a unique global solution for all the projects, of course, you are going to take more time in order to move to 2.1. If it's case by case, you can adopt 2.1 in some pilot projects and move and going forward. And of course, the scope of the solution is If you are using process bus or station bus and all the services that you are using, is also is something that could be also a driver. I will try to explain a little bit about an improvement in 9-2 later in my presentation. And also how many new substations are planned. If you don't have many substations with 6150 planned, then it's not the big issue to decide if going to 2.1 or remaining 2.0. And also how many refurbishments. It's easier to adopt the new standard in the new edition of the standard in new substations. With the refurbishment, maybe you have to study a little bit more. And finally, if you have in your roadmap a centralized protection and control solution, if you have this in your roadmap, think in 2.1 and moving forward, because it's going to be the best option to take the most updated edition of the standard. From a technical perspective point of view, I think it's good to see how many issues have been included in the new edition of the standard. So I selected part 6, 7-2, 7-3, 7-4, and 8-1, and I took a look on all the issues that have been included in the standard and all the issues that have been in the tissue database, and I found that 335 issues have been included in this edition 2.1. So that means 71% of all of them. And the ones that have not been included have been categorized as further improvements, not applicable, or they are still in red. So I think this is a big number. The 71% of the tissues created with edition 2 has been included in the amendment, provoking not a major change in the standard. Because all the issues included in edition 2.1 are solved, so you don't need to explicitly name them in your specifications. You don't have to review the provider's documentation to be sure they are included, because if the ID is conformance to 2.1, you know that all these issues have been included. And just to finish this technical perspective, in 9-2 improves the sample synchronization information when using PTP, that I think is the present and of course the future for sample values. And there is a field in the APDU that means sample synchronization, that in the edition 2 is true or false. So now you have 3 values, and the old value true 1 means local synchronization. This is important. That means that you have lost the synchronization with the grandmaster clock, but the local clock of the imaging unit of the device sending sample values is still valid. And you have a new value 2 to be sure that the device is synchronized with the grandmaster clock. So I think this is important if you are planning to use 9-2. I think this is a good improvement. And if you think in centralized protection and control system, I think this is a big driver to say, okay, in the future, I think I have to move to 2.1, taking into account the roadmap that has been presented today about the certification test. So what to do? It depends, of course. It depends on each utility, how many substations the utility has, and so on. And moving forward to edition 2.1, I think is the best option. But of course, for new substation, always if policy, procurement strategy, and the roadmap allows you to do it. And for existing substation, if you need issues to be included, try to go to 2.1, taking into account that no need to update it. Existing server IDs 2.0 don't need to be updated, but remember that maybe you have to update the client. That is not the big number on the equation, but you have to take into account, and you have to know if you have to upgrade the clients that you have in your substation. For me, the question is when to do it, and then we are. And now I will try to explain the point of view of Red Eléctrica, that I think is also focusing that we require level A certificates for the IDs that we use. So what is the situation in Red Eléctrica? We don't have too many substations with 61850. It's around 10 up to date is around 10. We have now a compromise of using 61850 in at least 10% of the new substations in the next from 2021 to 2025. And the solution that we now are, let's say, standardizing inside Red Eléctrica is using IDs near the field to control breakers and deep connectors, but we don't have sample values yet. We have a 2-year roadmap for a solution that is ongoing, and also we have an innovation project to study centralized protection and control architectures that is also ongoing. And as I said, we require level A certification of IDs during our own certification process. So when we think in moving to Amendment 2.1, we have to think that we have today 2 providers of HMI gateway. We are studying with them if the client is now compatible with 2.1, or we have to do an upgrade, and how much is it, of course. But remember, we don't have too many substations, so we don't have too many clients, so it's not a big number. And protection IDs, sorry for that. Protection IDs. We have certified protection IDs with edition 2, and our idea is to study the upgrade to 2.1 as soon as the IDs that we are using today that are certified in our own certification process, functionality talking, I would say. If these IDs have a level A certificate in 2.1, then we will study the upgrade of these IDs in order to use 2.1. And for the breakers and switches ID controllers that we have with our solution 61850, because we have 2 substations with this kind of solution, but 2 pilot projects, of course. So we are now planning to have a certification process for next year. So let's see if it is too soon or not to use 2.1 at that moment for this kind of IDs. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much. I give back to Herb. Thank you.
Herb, you're on mute still.
Thank you, Carlos. I just want to give some final thoughts. And let's get started. So one of the things that is happening is we now have a new site at UCAIug called Redmine. And you'll see that it has several projects, but one of them is the User Feedback Task Force, and Carlos is the chairperson of that task force. So if you want to see any of the future issues that are being vetted by the standards organization that have been inputted by the users, that's the place to go. If you want to go and see how testing is being changed, you can see the issues with the 61850 conformance test. It's totally transparent. You don't have to have a login. I am actively working on migrating the SharePoint certificate database into Redmine. And since this reservation topic is important between edition 2 and 2.1, we'll be adding a filterable field so that people can can filter on it and see which clients have already been tested to conformance for that optional conformance block that Joel was talking about. Wanted to announce that we have a 61850 interop to test our findings. It's been bifurcated into a virtual SPL testing week that's scheduled for November 8th through 12th. The face-to-face will be June or July in Europe somewhere, potentially Italy. And if you want to participate and you have particular test cases that you want addressed, please drop me an email and I'll get you enrolled so you can help us out. So some final thoughts. Users can continue with edition 2, but planning needs to begin on how to migrate to edition 2.1. As you've heard, migration to 2.1 requires thought, planning, and potential research. It is possible to have mixed 2.0 and 2.1 applications and devices in a single system. And if you need to have some questions answered, UCAIug is here to support its members. And with that, I think we are done because I don't think we have any unanswered questions. No, we got 2. Carlos, there's a question to you about why does REEE require a level A certificate specifically?
Yes, yes, I was trying I was answering by writing, but yeah, of course. Hi, Andrew. This is a good question, and I have to say that it's a decision of Red Eléctrica in order to have a certificate that it has been done by an independent lab. So we think and we believe that it is important for us that the IEDs have been certified and tested by an independent lab that doesn't anything to do with the provider. So that's the reason why we require level A. But this has been since edition 1. We have only one substation with edition 1, but we require level A at that moment.
I just want to comment that that's a Red Eléctrica policy. UCAIug, we view the accreditation of both types of labs to be equivalent.
Yes, yes, yes. I think this is a decision of the utility. It's not. I wouldn't say it's going to work better or worse because the two type of certificates are valid, but it's a decision of the utility. And the end is, as I tried to explain at the beginning, each utility has its own requirements and its own specific things.
Or should we quickly explain the difference?
Well, level B is a lab that is associated with a vendor. So level A is an independent third-party lab that can test any vendor's equipment or applications.
Both of which are accredited by the UCA to the same standards.
That is correct.
Level B is an internal vendor lab.
Yep. We have a question for you, Richard. Any conformance test for edition 2.1 already done at DNV?
Yes, I see the question and I already responded that this is confidential information. I cannot share it.
But what I can share, I believe, and I'm going to share it, is DNV is undergoing accreditation for 2.1. Yes.
So that's so we're working on it. We have test tools. We have devices. So it's all in process. But we first we have to go through the accreditation of the UCA, so that yeah. So at the moment, the current you expected something like August 2021, so that seems like a reasonable schedule. So at the moment, there are no certificates available for Amendment 1 in the certificate database, but yeah, keep track on it, and in August or September, you will see. I hope you will see that there is the first certificate issued.
Yeah, and it will not be on the SharePoint database, by the way.
Oh, it's in
It'll be in the
red
mine. Yep.
Okay.
We have a question about SCT to be certified, but not available yet. Can server be certified alone in the interim? ICT functionality is mandatory to be part of the server testing in server certification in 2.1. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay. So this
SCT certification is separate. SCT is a separate certification. It's independent from any device. But ICT is connected to a device, a server device.
Right. And it is required that that function get tested along with the server. We're in discussions if that function, sorry, he came back. There is slightly more coverage to get an ICT certificate. So this is the server testing doesn't require you to get an ICT conformance certificate. I hope that helps. Okay.
There's an overlap, and it could be efficient to do both, but it's up to the utilities to require it. It's up to the utility to decide, okay, I like to have the devices certified. Yes, but yeah, how about engineering tools? So not many utilities have any requirements related to engineering tools. So that's we will see how it will work out. And for Amendment 1, there will be testing involved for ICT as part of the server testing. So I hope the interoperability of SCL tools will improve in the next UCAIug interoperability test.
Go ahead. So we have a question, Richard, about tool testing. ICD, IID, and SCD shall be validated only for Edition 2 as part of Conformance. I believe that's a true statement.
Yeah. So we don't use the CID, we use the ICD, IID, and SCD file. Yeah. So that is the importing and exporting of those files as part of the server conformance. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Let's see. The last question is about the red mine. Red mine is open, yeah, for everybody, yeah.
Yep.
You don't have to be a member. Yeah.
That is correct. How secure Goose? How secure MMS and Goose is going to work? Any PKI involved? Yes, PKI is involved. Maybe we should have a, Beth, do you have the questionnaire ready to go?
Which questionnaire? The survey at the end?
The survey at the end. Yeah.
Yep, they'll get that. Anyone, once you sign off, you'll get prompted to do a survey. So we appreciate your feedback and answering that survey. It's only 5 questions. It won't take much time at all. And then once you submit that, within 24 hours, you will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording.
And the presentations?
And the presentations will be sent out in a follow-up next week.
Yep. So the reason I brought Beth in is because we're looking for new topics for future UCA IUG webinars as part of that survey. So if you have ideas and if you want to talk about security, put that into the survey. And I think I'm seeing new topic. You test the ICT. This keeps changing. There's a question: at which point can we start SCT conformance testing for edition 2.1? Richard?
Yes. At the moment, we started with a server, and the next step is to set up test procedures for client. And then the third step is to set up test procedures to complete the test procedures for an ICT tool. Yes, and then the last activity for the UCA is to set up test procedures for the SCT tool. I'm the editor, and I'm alone. Not alone, but I get support. But yeah, my resources are limited, so I have to prioritize the editing work. So SCT is a bit on a low profile at the last. It will come, but probably next year.
I think we have cleared all of the questions. Shall we just give it a minute in case more comes up? We got a question from Edwin. Will the Q&A also be disseminated, Beth?
Yes, I can include that in the follow-up, both the presentation and a copy of all the questions and answers here today.
And with that, I think we can close the webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for their time and their questions. I hope you have found this useful. And I guess we can close it off, Beth.
Yep, that's it. Thanks everyone for your time. And like I said, there'll be some follow-up sent out so you can get a link to the recording. And next week you should see the presentation and the question and answers. Again, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.